Our next speaker is Mr. Declan Ganley, who is an entrepreneur, a practitioner, founder, chairman, and CEO of Rivada Networks. And he wanted me to let you know that he was the spearhead of the Irish efforts to defeat the Lisbon Treaty. This is probably something.
My co-spearhead is down there, Caroline Simons, who worked with me hand in hand at that time.
Welcome.
Yes. So thank you very much, Kishore, and good afternoon, everybody. You know, the previous two speakers really nailed it and stole my thunder in so many ways. As a CEO of a company that innovates, we've got 98 granted patents, over 200 pending. We are a very active technology company in the wireless space. I bash my head against crony corporatism every day. And I'm in courts in the US this week and in Mexico this week fighting exactly the issues that you talked about. The biggest enemies of the free market, of economic growth, those that are suppressing GDP and that are responsible for the core root of the West's problems, which is chronic risk aversion, they are hiding in our own ranks. They are called business. It's a misnomer. They exercise regulatory capture. They are crony corporatists. I don't call them crony capitalists. Not that capitalism is a great description of anything, but crony corporatism is what I've called it. And when you fight them as a growth entrepreneur, it's those Fortune 500 companies that can afford to put 80 lobbyists on their payroll, that can go out and get the drafts of legislation put together, that can exercise the regulatory capture and the influence that turns the system into a racket. And the most damaging thing that the racket does is it stops innovation, it stops risk-taking, and you have to have almost an irrational level of optimism as an entrepreneur to be prepared to take the fight on. Because it's so disheartening when you're in the trenches every day and you're fighting this and you see how rigged the system is. It's tough when you have to go up against that and fight it every day and raise the millions of dollars and millions of euros that it takes to fight that. It's not to defeat somebody that's trying to out-innovate you, that's developing better intellectual property than you, that's got better technology than you. No, they have the same problem. It's the big, giant incumbents that are sitting there and manipulating a system to a point where we bailed out chronically insolvent institutions, to the point where we have made our states, in the long term, chronically insolvent, so that we have utterly distorted and mispriced debt, where debt is too cheap now, but the only ones that can access it to the levels of the billions at a time are exactly the type of crony corporatists that we're talking about. And what we are storing up is what I believe is inevitable, which is hyperinflation, which is going to come in sooner or later when we realize that this mispriced debt is not being invested into these sectors and areas that create the biggest economic growth and return. And that, you know, the old saying goes, you know, the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. If I knew when that moment was going to come, that would be great. It could be 6 months, it might not be for 15 years, but it is going to happen. That day of reckoning is going to come. It's going to result in a massive debasement of our currencies and in hyperinflation. I think that's how this ends, and then we're going to have a great big purge, the one that we should have had in 2008 and 2009. There won't be anything to bail out anybody with, and we're going to be in really interesting times. Professor, you talked about payroll taxes. You gave me an idea, which is that social insurance and payroll taxes need to be included in gross salary figures that we give to our employees as employers. When we advertise a job and a salary figure, we should be including the national insurance PRSI contributions in the gross figure that we give, and we make it in job offers. We employers are not offering a job to the state, but we are giving the state an off-the-top tax on the labour being exchanged for the monetary value provided. We need to make it very clear, because in the popular mind, the way we talk about income taxes misleads. We're actually being taxed, and labour is being taxed at an even higher level than most people understand, and we need to make sure that they understand it. And Veronique, you talked about Occupy Wall Street. At the height of the Occupy Wall Street movement, I went down to Zuccotti Park. I was actually at NYPD headquarters. They're a customer of mine on the communication side of things, and I was watching on a video feed the Occupy movement protest at Zuccotti Park, and I said, I want to go down there and have a look at this. So I went down, and I had the most outrageous pinstripe suit on, pocket square, the whole lot. I mean, I looked like the capitalist from the Monopoly board game. I just didn't have the top hat. If I had a top hat, I would have worn it as well. And I went down, and there was a plainclothes policeman. The NYPD were very nervous that I was doing this, but I said, I want to talk to these people. I went down, and I went into their sort of tents and everything, and this crowd started gathering around, the hoods up and all of that sort of stuff. And, I might as well have had Wall Street stamped on my forehead. And somebody said, hey, man, are you from Wall Street? You work on Wall Street? And I said, well, actually, not physically. I said, but in the sense that you mean it, yes, I sort of do. I said, I'm in the technology sector, but, I rely on Wall Street for financing. And so the question started to come. And I explained, I said, some of these players here on Wall Street, I said, they are the recipient of massive bailouts. Some of them perform much better than others, but others, the ones that haven't performed as well, are getting bailed out for their mistakes. I said, and they're getting the money from who? They're getting the money from the government. And hands started to go up, and somebody said, well, are you saying that like if I could get free money, would I take it to cover my losses? And I said, well, yeah, would you? And he said, yeah, I guess I would. And another hand came up, and another guy said, he was actually Canadian, he identified himself. He said, are we protesting in the wrong place? I said, yes, you are. I said, you need to go to Washington. That's where these decisions are being made. But it was interesting that going down and engaging with these people very quickly, probably in less than 10 minutes, the realization sank in, we're in the wrong place. Now, unfortunately, they didn't move, but they were in the wrong place. And it was a very interesting time, that Occupy movement, because they were so close to being on the money, and the understanding was there, and it was sinking in that regulatory capture was the biggest problem. I did prepare something, and I'm going to read it today, because I suppose it touches upon something beyond the economics. I've talked about that chronic risk aversion, and one of the things I think that one of the reasons that this continues is that we do not have enough voices being raised in objection to this racket, or at least we didn't. And maybe we are seeing these voices being raised in a way that makes a lot of us very uncomfortable, but it's the inevitable result of allowing the status quo ante to continue. The pursuit of liberty and justice for all, a cause for which millions of Americans pledge renewed allegiance every morning, has been the idea which has defined not just that country, but the whole of the Western world in the 70 years since the defeat of fascism. Ours is a civilization whose great monuments bear witness to our identity as the home of the free, from Lady Liberty's torch raised high above her head at the mouth of the Hudson to the Freedom Monument in Riga, where as a young man I first bore witness to that triumphant expression of man's long struggle to seize for himself control over his own destiny. Today, the great struggle for freedom is being waged not against enemies without. The West has proved itself superior time and again to those tyrants who would practice Orwell's version of a mailed fist smashing a human face. Today, the struggle is waged within, a fierce and uncompromising battle for the meaning of the word liberty itself. in which both sides have sadly adapted some of the tactics of the totalitarian. In this new age of division, we must renew our determination to be the home of the free. There's a famous photograph taken in Hamburg in 1936, which every child should see. It shows a lone man in a sea of thousands refusing to raise his arm in acclamation of his Führer. He stands alone, his arms folded across his chest in a simple show of defiance, an individuality that had the potential to cost him his liberty, his freedom, perhaps even his life. Like all great photographs, it echoes through history, its message as relevant to the young people of our age as any message can be. Freedom and liberty are not preserved by the many. They are preserved instead by the conscience of the individual, the one, the lone voice, the person who refuses to comply. That brave man in Hamburg is the icon of our cause. Too often, the man who folded his arms is seen as an icon simply of resistance to Hitler and fascism. He was that, but he was also more. For his act of defiance was not targeted simply at Nazis and their Führer. It was also a powerful rebuke to the hundreds around him, the people who raised their right arms, the people who went along with the crowd. It takes courage not to go along with the crowd, especially when that crowd is screaming at you that you must. But throughout the history of humanity, our race has shown time and time again that the human spirit will never be broken by even the most immense pressure to conform or to abandon its conscience. The long history of our people in the West is littered with examples of brave men and women willing to lose their lives for an idea or a thought. St. Thomas More, Joan of Arc, Giordano Bruno, the Oxford Martyrs, the list is endless. And so it is that great accomplishment of our civilization has been to institute amongst ourselves a form of government that ensures that no man or woman shall ever be compelled by their government to accept that which they do not believe to be true. That is the cause in which our glorious dead have given their lives. Our freedom to think and to speak and to live our lives according to our own consciences is the most precious liberty of all, and it's been forgotten. It's being forgotten. For power in our society does not simply rest with those who rule over us. The currents of political thought are not powered only by the House of Commons or the Congress or the Assemblée Nationale. They shift also with the winds of public discourse and with the conversations we have with each other every day. We are the most powerful generations ever to have walked upon this earth. Every one of us, with the tools technology has provided us, has ready access to a potential audience of millions. Somebody with 500 Twitter followers will, on average, have their tweets seen by 100,000 different people in a calendar year. Every one of us can now shape the conversation in ways that have previously always been unimaginable. Not only have we been granted an unprecedented power to speak, we've also been given more control over the voices we listen to than any humans who came before us. We can create our own bubbles and live within them and hide ourselves away from the unbeliever. We are in the process of fracturing ourselves as a people. The consequences of this aren't all negative, but the paradox is that while there are more voices in our politics than ever, fewer and fewer voices are actually being heard. We are told that we live in a multicultural, pluralist, cosmopolitan society, but the truth is many of us don't. Instead, we too often live in monocultural, rigid and highly ordered little societies of our own choosing, and increasingly there are those who react badly to the discovery that they are not the majority anywhere outside of the world that they have created for themselves. And so, whole swathes of our people must be explained away. For what is someone who disagrees with what everybody believes to be a fact except a troglodyte? What is somebody who rejects what everybody believes to be a good idea except stupid? What is somebody who rejects what everybody believes to be decent except a bigot? These divisions and this culture are corrosive. It's a much bigger problem for the left half of society than those of us that may not be on that side. for we are exposed to their worldview every day in every television program, newspaper article, and movie theatre. They are exposed to us only at the ballot box, much to their increasing horror. In the United States, this divide has ushered in President-elect Trump in an act of absolute rebellion by those who did not feel that they were being heard. What we are witnessing in the West is the revolt of the people against an establishment consensus that demands relentless conformity from each and every one of us before it is willing to declare us civilized. It is also a revolt against a culture in which a small elite decides new catechisms of the day and then declares questioning those catechisms to be proof of the questioner's unfitness to be considered reasonable. This is the biggest threat to liberty today. It comes from within and it grows daily. It is the consequence of alienation from one another and from a shared sense of purpose. The United States Declaration of Independence, the seminal document in the history of mankind's quest for freedom, holds these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's perhaps the most quoted passage of any foundational document anywhere in the world, but the very next paragraph is not quoted often enough. It says that wherever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. This year, we've seen the people begin to do just that in the United States and in the United Kingdom. And if we want to preserve liberty and preserve our shared and common values, we as a society, and particularly those of us who are in a position to attend and speak at conferences like this one, must recommit ourselves to behaving like genuine liberals of the classical sense. But that is not our only challenge. If preserving liberty was as simple as following a few people you disagree with on social media, liberty would not be in danger. Writing of the communist Russia in his 1932 essay, Bolshevism and the Bourgeoisie, Christopher Dawson observed that the Bolsheviks had upset the throne and altar and put in place nothing but themselves. The Bolsheviks are not on record as having responded to Dawson, but it's likely that their response would have been to say that the throne and altar had failed and it was time to sweep them away. But one of the failures of communism and collectivism has always been its failure to recognize the importance of a unifying creed and set of beliefs for a people that is more than simply economic. Professor Scruton addressed that this morning. In the West, increasingly, there is no unifying creed or set of beliefs. We too, over the last 30 years, have swept away throne and altar. We've replaced them with vanishing nothingness, an emptiness where our shared identity should be. If we want people to assimilate into our society, to defend our values, and to place them on the same high price that our ancestors willingly paid, we have to give them something into which to assimilate. We have to project a sense of pride, of common purpose, of self-belief. In conversation with the journalist Peter Sewell, the former Pope Benedict XVI had this to say, quote, "It is obvious today that the concept of truth has become suspect. A large proportion of contemporary philosophies, in fact, consist of saying that man is not capable of truth. But viewed in that way, man would not be capable of ethical values either. Then he would have no standards. Then he would only have to consider how he arranged things reasonably for himself, and then, at any rate, the opinion of the majority would be the only criterion that counted," end quote. The former Pope Emeritus, I should say, criticism echoes that 1932 criticism of the communists. When we abolish the concept of universal truth, as we have done in the West with regard to our values, and replace it with nothing but our own perceptions of what is true, then the very foundational stones on which a society is built begin to collapse. There is a certain truth hidden in the oldest parable of them all. The freedom of Eden was conditional on Adam making the choice not to eat the apple. The apple and the tree on which it grew was to be respected and venerated. The apple tree was not a restriction on freedom, but merely the price that had to be paid for its preservation. When we bite into that apple, the whole structure comes crashing down. The apple in today's West is the unifying values which we all must share in order to coexist in liberty. We must not undermine them, and as we do, we find that we pay the price for doing so. It would have been unthinkable just a decade ago for a candidate for the presidency of the United States to declare half the citizens of their country deplorable. It would have been unthinkable, too, for the other candidate to demand the imprisonment of his opponent. But when our shared view of the truth is so diverse and our shared values have become optional, then so our sense of duty to treat each other as full heirs to the inheritance of liberty becomes coloured by something else. And what then are those shared values that we've lost? They are the values that we've chosen to insulate ourselves from. The freedoms of faith and conscience, the freedom of speech, the freedom of thought, and the freedom to dissent. When we in the West demand, as we increasingly do, that the world conforms to our individual view of how it should be ordered, when we allow the voices of dissent to be silenced, and when we declare, as we so frequently do, that there are no truths, only points of view, we are biting into the apple. Today, many people in our society argue that some things that have been true for millennia were never true at all. Gender itself, the most basic natural differentiator provided to our species by nature, is now being questioned. Truths can and do change or alter over time. It was once accepted to be true that the sun orbited the earth, but truths have never changed so rapidly as they do now. Increasingly, what was true yesterday is denounced as racist bigotry today. There is a grave danger to all of us in this, because people do not give up truth easily. And when we abolish the altar and the throne, we must be wary of the danger that we are replacing it with a terrible new tyranny of the self. It is in these circumstances and in these times that the man in Hamburg who folded his arms should be remembered. To defend liberty, we must tirelessly seek out his voice wherever we can find it. The person who holds on to the truth, who fears not the crowd, who faces down the prevailing wind, and who by his obstinacy challenges us to look again at the direction of the herd. We are in uncharted waters as a civilization, and it is both exciting and dangerous. In times of great change, when old values are challenged and existing understandings are pulled apart, the resultant transformation of a society is not always guaranteed to be for the better. As a civilization, we've bitten into the apple. The veneration of the tree has ended. Look around you and try to find an institution of moral or civic authority that commands the respect that it did, say, just 30 years ago. We'll struggle to find one. In these times, therefore, our task as individuals is to seek out and find the shared values that still unite us. It may be hard for some of us to do that, but it is essential that we do it. Because if those shared values fall apart, then the process of dehumanizing each other will begin. The process of declaring that those who do not live within our own micro-societies to be something different will begin. The process of viewing society itself as the enemy will begin, and the respect that we have for each other's liberty will begin to be lost if that process has not begun already. And that, my friends, is exactly what the brave man in Hamburg refused to raise his hand to salute. Remember him.